again because I'm not sure. It still says viewers waiting, so I think this time around, hopefully, we are live. Or maybe not, or maybe we are. No, we're live. So welcome back, everyone, to the FPL script. Let us know, first of all, if our audio is fine, because that was an issue last time around, and I think we've tried to make some changes to it. Hopefully, it's improved. Today's episode, we're going to be going through, once again, some more preseason stuff. We're pretty close to the start of the season, and Schadenfreude is here, my co-host, has provided a lot of data viz for us that will be worth walking through after we discuss where our drafts are at. And we'll probably close out as well discussing transfers and maybe how to think about some picks, particularly some of the edge picks that probably are either making or close to making your draft. So let's just get started with my draft. I am currently on Henderson. I'm not fully keen on just going Henderson. I'm totally fine with going with the 4.5 rotation. I have to say I don't love the idea of going double Spurs defense because it kind of pigeonholes me a little bit too much towards wildcard 6. So I just generally am okay with players like Henderson, Flecken, or even an expensive goalkeeper to start the season. Ederson can be included in that, of course. I do have Trent and Porro, which is featured through most of my drafts. And to be honest, I'm very happy with these players because even if I, let's say, was changing the structure around, I think the only player that would come in, or the players that would come in, would be a strengthening in the defense, right? More players like Guardiola, maybe an Arsenal player if I was a bit more wildcard agnostic. But Burn clearly does his purpose in a lot of our drafts in being good for game week 1. My question, of course, is going to be his minutes. It seems like for the first time we've seen Burn benched in a preseason friendly. That might just be because he's played a lot of fixtures and he clearly doesn't need to be playing, I suppose, that many minutes of football. But I'll stay tuned to that. It could be Lewis Hall at one point, but you do want that player to be nailed at that 4.5 position, particularly if they're going to be that sort of good first auto sub option, particularly since I have Barco, who's already a bit of a problem child. Given that he didn't feature in today's friendly, and I don't know what's going on with that, but doesn't seem like it's a big piece of news. As we did mention, friendlies are, when they're sort of scheduled every few days, there will be players who will be missing out, and he's probably a young player, maybe doesn't need to be playing that much. As far as the midfield that the last pick that's probably interesting is going to be Munoz. A little bit anti-review, I suppose, as a pick, but I mean, the underlying numbers are good. He has really, really good shot volume as far as I can see. Seems like a pick that I'd be okay with starting the season at, particularly since I don't have Guardiola and I kind of want to have a player that I'd be quite happy to play most weeks as a default defender. And then in the midfield, a pretty standard midfield. In fact, pretty ugly as well. It's got Harry Winks in it, and then Nkunku, Saka, Bruno Fernandes, and Eze. So no Gordon, but I'm still keenly looking out to news about Trippier, whether he leaves by game week 1, because that would interest me more to getting Gordon, maybe having a little bit more rotation there. But with how strong Bruno looks on every which model I look at, I don't really have too many questions about having him in my draft. And then in the front line, well, it's Haaland, it's Isak, it's Armstrong. All players I think we all universally love, but keeping an open eye towards players like João Pedro, things like that. Shall we move on to your draft?
Yeah. Hi everyone. So once again, we had a bit of a gaffe when we started the stream. So hopefully everything is right. Again, please let us know if our audios are.
Your draft looks so similar to mine that I actually got confused.
It does. Yeah. So maybe I chose Flecken just to be different subconsciously, but it is supposed to represent just a 4.5 million goalkeeper. I don't really have an opinion right now because I would like to avoid Eze versus Flecken in game week 1. But if, let's say, we don't find out who is number 1 out of Johnston and Henderson, and the second dilemma, obviously Chelsea goalkeepers are probably off limit now because there's too many of them, and not a single one of them has been loaned out or sold yet, right? So we essentially have 4 goalkeepers there right now. So that is just out of the question. So for now, I think the first different pick is Guardiola. You don't have him now, right? Because you have Pedro Porro.
Yeah.
And I had Pedro Porro actually. I just went Guardiola because I had 0.5 million in the bank and it felt criminal to leave 0.5 in the bank in Gameweek 1. But Poro is also very high on review. People who saw him score yesterday against Bayern Munich will certainly agree, although they had already conceded 2 by that point. So
yeah,
you are free to choose whatever you want to interpret from that game and Spurs in general, to be honest. Bruno and Saka, I think I'm almost okay with it. As in, I don't think I'll change my mind unless I find out that Saka is going to have limited minutes or something, because I just feel like I can keep them for at least 4 game weeks. When I was looking at Bruno's fixtures, I think it's the thing which led us to getting Diaby over Mbumo last season, where I think I'm just too fixated on looking at just the fixtures and saying, this doesn't look good for United, which it hasn't looked for a long time, to be honest. But for example, last season when he scored against Burnley, he got 3 bonus points. When he scored against Fulham, he got 2 bonus points. So I'm not that worried, to be honest. I think Bruno is going to be a good pick, given the uncertainty in minutes for players who are coming back from the Euros. If we had, let's say, no European Championship and let's say England had gotten eliminated in the round of 16 or something, then maybe Foden and other players would be more under consideration for me. But for now, I think Bruno is fine. Rogers, I think, was a consequence of reviews solve. I don't. For now, I'm okay with it, but I also feel like that is another potential transfer that I'm booking in a way, because I feel like if there's anyone, again, FPL villain says, and he's very confident that Rogers will get it at least the first 4 to 6 weeks. So I'm happy to bet on it. But I also feel like if I'm feeling uncertain, and let's say the uncertainty has to manifest in some way in bad performances in the first couple of game weeks, do I think he can get benched? I don't know. I don't have a good read on what's going to happen with his minutes. So for now, he's okay. I'll stick with him. Both of us have the same 3 front line, like the same 3 strikers, right? For now.
Yeah, I'm talking about Andreas, maybe.
Yeah. Andreas, I think, is a couple of things. Emil Smith Rowe to Fulham has happened. So we have yet to see what is the impact of that transfer, who takes set pieces. I'm not too worried about direct free kicks. Maybe corners are up for grabs. And the second bit is, where does Andreas play exactly? Because I've seen Fulham fans talking about him playing as number 10, him playing on the right wing. I want to see what sort of minutes he's getting in which position. And I was also looking at his minutes play per match, and it's not great. Let's be honest. And of course, it is tainted a bit by his time at United. But even if we look at his time at Fulham,
yeah, it's very low. It is literally living at that edge of 70, 72 at best.
Yeah, exactly. And so if I'm going, let's say I go with the average expectation that he plays the average number of minutes that he has played at Fulham. I don't know if I'm that keen on him. Maybe penalties is going to be something that changes things for me, but I don't know if there are any friendlies left for Fulham for him to get a penalty and then score, which which is also maybe too much of a demand, because not every player is going to get that chance.
Yeah.
But I have to be very confident about him being on penalty. That's all I'll say. And Konsa is there just because Villa have great fixtures and he's nailed.
I guess he covers Guardiola, and
he does.
Yeah, in those 2 games.
Absolutely. So that is the second consideration. And as always, the 4 billion goalkeeper spot, I was thinking about this. So I saw a lot of people talking about how they are recommending that you go with the lowest owned 4 million goalkeeper or the lower owned 4 million goalkeepers. And for me, that doesn't make much sense, because it is all about percentage of transfers out. It's not about the total number of transfers out.
Yeah.
That dictates the price rises and price falls. So it doesn't matter anyway. If it's going to be like a goalkeeper who is 0.1% owned and his ownership goes to 0%, he's still going to get a price drop.
Yeah.
So of course, the caveat is that if he is 0.1% owned, no one will talk about him. And we definitely know that the meta is influenced by content creators. So, let's say, and let's talk Andy or Ross or even yourself. If everyone has a say in with that particular player, then it's going to be really bad. But if they ignore him, I suspect it will stay the same. So those are the thoughts for my team. For Munoz, I am all with you there. I see that he is not high on EV, but I also feel like if I have 0.5 million to spare, I think he's the best upgrade for a 4.5 million defender. That's where I am. But if I can spend that money better, for example, Andreas to Nkunku is on the cards, right? I can do Munoz to 4.5 million defender, Guardiol to Pedro Porro, and I get 1 million to spend to do Andreas to Nkunku. And just for the record, because I think that has been a development that people are focusing on, I have no doubt that Nkunku's words have been mistranslated, as in, people are just cutting and pasting it.
Yeah, I think people actually misunderstood the quote anyways, because it's not like I think people just need to understand that players coming back from injury aren't going to say that they feel 100% anyways, and the only way for a player to get close to 100% is by playing more minutes of football. So I just don't really understand why people are getting so concerned about it. If people were so worried about the minutes that he could even sort of accumulate on the field, he wouldn't be playing 90-minute matches within the preseason games that he's played so far. So I just think don't get too caught up in it. The quote actually reads really well to me. I actually liked seeing that quote. And didn't mind it at all.
Honest, even simpleton like myself, because I'm not an athlete, but when I suffered an ACL tear, I mean, my confidence was completely shot for about a year. And he has had back-to-back bad injuries. And so I think he's also trying to not overcommit and under-deliver, because I think that has a big impact on your mental health as well. So I completely understand why he's trying to shield himself from any potential whiplash if he were to get injured again. So I absolutely agree with you. There is no need to read too much into it. But that does mean that because he's coming back from a couple of bad injuries, he is not going to play 90 minutes. So you have to scale your expectations to 80, 75, 80. But at 6.5, I still think that's pretty decent, right?
It's amazing, frankly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I think that the thing is, too, with when you look at Chelsea's fixtures, they are playable until Game Week 8. Like, it's such a clean, good run. In fact, his best fixture is on Game Week 6 when we talk about just the opening set. And even as someone who's wildcarding on 6, I still find him to be, featuring on drafts that I'd like to go for with, non-90 minutes. So I do love Nkunku, and I think he's a pick that feels good to start with. I know it's not the best starting with a poor Game Week 1 fixture, but besides that, there's really nothing to dislike about going for Nkunku at the start, in my opinion.
And also, Chelsea being in the Conference League is good for him, in my opinion, because what that does is, I think Conference League for teams like Chelsea has to be extremely down the line in their list of priorities. And so they can easily play their second string team. I think even if it were Europa, they would probably try to field as strong a team as they could, because they have a good record in Europe. And I think Europa still, to a degree, has some history, right? Because it was the UEFA Cup before it got rebranded.
Yeah, and so you can qualify to the Champions League through it, right? Which is a huge difference.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. So there is some there are some stakes when it comes to Europa, but there are no stakes for the Conference League. So I definitely feel like that is good for him, and he'll definitely get the rest in those games.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I do really like your draft. It's probably what I'd be considering if I went on Guardiola, but I do really like Nkunku, and that's why I'm on him. And what I like about Nkunku is I do think that his minutes can't really get too far worse of what I'd expect. Whereas I still think that they can be a little bit higher than what I'm sort of patiently anticipating at the start. And that's something that I'm quite fond of in general with a lot of the picks that I go with. I know some people have different opinions on that, because some people tend to see things as a little bit more like 0 to 90, but as we see with someone like Andreas, that there are players who are unfortunately unfit enough to play full football games, whereas I think Nkunku, when he's fully fit, can play the full 90 minutes of a match, as we can see even in the preseason. But Andreas is pretty far from that. You'll see only a few 90s really across, even when he's a key part of the Fulham team over the last 2 years. Like, I think he's averaged almost the same amount of minutes in the previous 2 years. He's not someone who's injury prone, which is nice, but he still very clearly clocks that sort of certain average of minutes, which is just indicative of his own abilities, like fitness wise.
And so before we move on, one last thing was about Andreas. So I think we can map out Andreas and Harry Wilson's minutes.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that I can get together for the data for the next pod.
Yeah.
Where I just want to see or track that. I just always feel like Harry Wilson is right there. Whenever I see any of the front line except for the striker, I just feel like Harry Wilson is always there to take up minutes from any of those spots.
Yeah.
Maybe not Emil Smith Rowe now, because he is a record transfer, so definitely don't see him getting subbed off often for Harry Wilson. But for the other two, I definitely feel Harry Wilson is always a candidate, because he seems to be the unlucky player who is always sort of on the periphery, but he's too good to always be on the periphery. So Marco Silva tries to give him as many minutes as he can, but this is just anecdotal evidence. I'll try to see if that matches up with data.
I think one thing that I was discussing with Critic, for example, was just the right wing minutes, right? With Bobby Reed leaving, you have that opened up. It's unlikely Adama is a starting player. Yes, of course, Iwobi can cover many of the positions that we're talking about. But I tend to think Wilson's also similar to that sort of Andreas ilk, where he's only going to play something like 70 minutes a game. So in reality, he could still play a lot of minutes in different positions. Wilson, that is, even if he's mostly a bench player for them, which I think could happen. Or he plays right wing and then you see Iwobi in the middle as part of a partnership potentially with someone like Lukic, because I'm not sure Reed is really a starting quality player for them. And yes, he's played Dame in the past, but I'm not personally seeing that they're going to be operating with him a little bit more than, let's say, as I said, Lukic. It will be, but some other Fulham fans will probably have different thoughts, and I know some aren't so keen on Andreas as we might be. But I tend to think he still feels like a safe pick for now, and very, very sort of worthy of that 5.5 value at the start, considering the fixtures.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can move on to the next segment.
Certainly. Do you want to? Well, this is your data viz show. So do you want to walk through this?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was something that I had brewing for a couple of weeks, and I had spoken with Fran as well, previous to publishing it today. So this is shot creating shots versus XA, right? If I'm not wrong. So I'm just trying to check the graph. Yeah, okay. So this is shot creating actions per 90 versus XA per 90 for all Premier League players. This is their career data. So any match which was recorded by FBref and has data for that match has been included in this. So what this gives you is a more holistic picture of assist potential, because what happens when you look at XA per 90 is you lose the rebound assists in that. So this is a way to try to capture that data. Now again, there is more noise in this, because the y-axis is just shots created from shots, which are the short rebounds basically. So they are not expected. That is what actually happened. So it will have some sort of caveat. And I've also spoken with Fran that there is a third dimension to this graph, which is finishing skill. Because what that does is it helps us to understand if a player is getting more shots after his shot because he's a bad finisher, or because he shoots in a way where the goalkeeper always, more often than not, spills it into a dangerous area, which is probably more skilled, I guess. Well, again, you can spin it either way, right? It's not neither here nor there. So
yeah, it's like you also need to get the shot on target too, which is like another
exactly. So depending on those factors, maybe you can have a third dimension to this. But for now, we can at least look at some of the players. It's a little the text is a little small for me, Fran. So if you want to go through the outliers for viewers and listeners.
Yeah, so I think top left corner, Ross Stewart from Southampton. Do you want to just walk through that?
Yeah, so Ross Stewart is a weird case, because he is so far above any other player there that I think I need to see if he falls in the category of maybe a suboptimal finisher.
Yeah.
And if he does, then that sort of justifies why he's getting so many short rebounds off his shots.
Mm-hmm.
But it is encouraging, because that simply means that there is a chance that he will get assists off short rebounds.
Right.
So there is that. And of course, it is per 90. So because he is not going to have as many minutes, you can check the scale, the color scale on the right hand side, which shows minutes played per 90, which is quite essential because if a player is not playing 90 minutes per game, the per 90 stats don't mean anything if he's only going to play 70 minutes per game. Now there are some players who will suffer as a result, like for example Saka, because last season when he was getting literally one goal every game or two goals every game or something ridiculous in a purple patch, he was getting subbed when they were winning 3-0 or 4-0 or something like that. So of course players will suffer, but if you take enough minutes, so interesting fact is the median number of minutes played in their career for Premier League players is 9,500 minutes. So if you just round up to, let's say, 9,900 minutes, you can get a sense of how many 90s that is, right? And that's not a small number. So it is, I would say, protected from small sample size errors. And just to make sure that there are no ridiculous outliers, I've also capped it at 1,000 minutes. So players that have played less than 1,000 minutes have been removed from this. So there was a player called Washington. There was Oscar Bob. There was Connor Bradley, and there was one more. There's 4 players that I noticed. Washington was an outlier, but the other 3 are players that we know who could potentially get some minutes this season. So they probably should be added. But again, Oscar Bob is pretty high in this list.
Yeah, I think it's nice that they're well-rated prospects as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's absolutely. So just to, I'm going to address one of the chat comments because it is quite relevant, which is that XA is a randomized stat.
Mm-hmm.
To an extent, you are right. It is far less predictive than any other expected stat that exists. What I have done here is, and maybe I will, because I haven't published this on X yet, I will probably do this tomorrow. I have not used simply XA. There is also XAG, which is backward assist and forward calculated assists on FBref. And if you go to, I think it's passing section of a player's statistics, you will find both of these metrics. So I've given weightage to both of them. And forward-looking assists or forward-looking expected assists are a better indicator. Again, even they have a tremendous amount of noise because it's very correlative. So as you start going back one pass from the actual goal creating action or the shot creating action, you lose a lot of information and a lot of noise gets added to the information. So you have to take it with a pinch of salt. But are people really going to argue with Bruno and KDB being number 2 and number 1 there? I don't think so.
Yeah, I want to push back on that a little bit, just because I mean you can see that a lot of this comes from things that we tend to say will produce genuine, tangible things in FPL. Like a lot of these players are set piece takers, and the 2 players that you mentioned specifically, like Bruno Fernandes and De Bruyne, like these are players who are just amazing in open play in creating chances anyways. So you're once you see the outliers, I would say with XAG for sure, you're looking at players who are definitely going to produce. Like if you look at De Bruyne, Bruno, these sorts of players, and this is once again with more sample size. This isn't just one season worth of data, right? So this is enough for us to say that these
20,000 minutes, by the way.
Exactly, yeah. So for these sorts of players, you already know that their body of work speaks to why they're huge outliers on this list. So most of these players are set piece takers, and I think we can have a lot of comfort in that, or they're just world-class open play attackers, like even Salah arguably is, right?
And also if you the most intriguing part of that graph is that sort of trio of Salah, Palmer and Gakpo, because those are players where I feel like, okay, so not only is their XA pretty decent or more than decent, it is pretty good, they also have pretty good chances of getting assists off short rebounds. So we like that in FPL, and I think last season was sort of an outlier for Cole Palmer. I don't think it's going to be as huge for him this season just because of the number of penalties he got. But
Right.
this stat has no mention of penalties, so we are excluding all of that. So even without all of that, he was exceptional in open play as well, and this absolutely shows that.
Yeah, yeah. Even when I was looking at sort of shot on target data, the like Salah and Palmer are the midfielders that you would see high up as well. So yeah, great.
Oh, sorry, I just realized something. Another aspect which I can add to this, and I'll look to how I can add this to this graph, is penalties 1/90. Now, I think, and you might agree with me on this, that stat is going to be the most random stat because it is completely depending on game state and a lot of other conditions which might never be replicated. So I don't know how much you're going to gain from that information, but maybe it would be just good to see if, let's say, there is a common adage in FPL, right, that good dribblers get more penalties.
Yeah,
For
so
example,
Raheem Sterling, I think, is the best,
exactly.
actually. Yeah.
Exactly. I was thinking of the same player, which most people will think of Raheem Sterling. So Raheem Sterling or the purple patch where United kept getting penalties and people kept chalking it up to, oh, they have so great dribblers like Rashford and Martial, and that's why they're getting so
Even
many.
Pogba at the time, I remember
Yes,
drew quite a lot that season.
which was
so yeah.
which was pretty unscientific and unfounded, and that proved to be the case because that season was followed up by the season where we had the lowest number of penalties. So definitely no merit or very less merit in that, but maybe interesting to see, and I'll see if I can bring it up for next week.
Yeah. But I think going back to what the viewer said as well, I mean, it might be a little bit more random in terms of the outcomes, but at the end of the day, it doesn't serve you poorly to be doing good in any of these metrics is the general consensus that I think we all have. You might overperform quite a bit, underperform quite a bit. Like Bruno, unfortunately, hasn't had the assists that we'd expect compared to Zixay the last 2 seasons, but generally speaking, it's still something that's positive that you look towards having more so than not. So the next one is XG, npxG per 90. So you want to go through that?
Yeah, so the other one which I've already published on X is a graph where I'm plotting finishing skill versus non-penalty expected goals per 90 with, again, the color graph or the color scale used for minutes played, minutes per match played. So this I have again used a 1000 minutes filter and tried to eliminate players. And the way I've calculated finishing skill is by using the formula that FPL Kiwi found to be most correlative with how finishing skill for a player progressed throughout their career.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, if I remember correctly, because I always get this wrong when I talk about it, it's plus 55 for both G and XG, and then you divide, so G plus 55 divided by npxG plus 55. So, I mean, Son is clear. We always knew that he's a freak of nature when it comes to finishing. And De Bruyne also, I think pretty much everyone is aware that he is a pretty strong finisher, especially because of those outside of the box goals that he often gets.
Yeah, because he doesn't actually have many chances per game, but when he does, that's the main thing we're talking about. Yeah,
that's a great point, by the way. So another way to filter out players who don't get a lot of shots, which we want for FPL, is to also plot either non-penalty XG per shot or to plot shots per 90 minutes. I think non-penalty XG per shot is still noisy because I just feel like, what are you going to do with that information per se? But I just feel like high volume shooters are essentially always good for FPL, regardless of what how bad of a finisher they are. As you can see with Darwin Núñez, who actually was not that bad of a finisher before last season, but last season has firmly taken him to below average finishing skill. The biggest point the biggest point in this graph, which Fran immediately caught on to, was Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So I'll let Fran take that up because
it's funny because
players are all Everton players.
I was having a discussion with Broccoli on Twitter, and he mentioned Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and I was looking at him like within one of the first days of FPL launching, and I actually had realized that his npxG to G was ridiculously bad, like worse than Jesus was my immediate thought, because it's just mental. And so like seeing him here, I was not surprised at all. But it's quite obscene because I do think a lot of people fondly remember a good Dominic Calvert-Lewin season, which was under Ancelotti, right? And we haven't seen too much of him since. But part of it might just be, I don't know. I mean, could we say it comes down to a lot of the stop-startness of his own activity within the last few seasons of the Premier League? Yeah, it is shockingly poor, but
No, I completely agree with that. So any player would be expected to be affected by the continuous or the stop-start nature of having, let's say, 4 to 5 seasons of that nature under his belt is bound to affect not just your finishing skill, but even your npxG per 90 as well.
yeah,
Because there is no consistency or rhythm of sort. Now, again, the biggest misconception people have is that maybe players that favor analytics don't think form or rhythm is real. It is real. We cannot measure it. So
Yeah.
it is of no use to us. And I think DCL is a good case for lack of rhythm. But because I have no way to quantify that, I just can't excuse it. I mean, I just can't ignore that he has been a bad finisher throughout his career. Solanke was a surprise to me. Maybe not that much of a surprise, but a little bit of a surprise. I thought he was an average finisher, but he's firmly below one on average. I don't know if we can see him here, but if not, I'll make sure.
I can't see him.
But he was here.
I can't see him here.
So he's the one who is directly above Mope. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And I guess, and the big caveat is a lot of these players still have a lot of their career left. So someone like Solanke can sort of redeem himself.
Absolutely.
And he has played a lot of Premier League minutes too, right? Where he unfortunately probably had some pretty tough season, I suppose, as a young up and coming player who probably wasn't really ready for the level of football.
And the way I'm justifying Solanke's maybe suboptimal finishing is that he is still gathering good npxG per 90, which is, I think, more consequential to FPL. And so the whole reason of plotting npxG versus finishing skill is that, let's say if Son were to be on the left-hand side of this graph, what use is that of to us? Because him being a great finisher also predicates on him getting some chances to finish those short or convert those chances into goals. So this, I think, provides a better look on if a player is justified or the selection of a player is justified. And again, review takes care of all of this in his expected value. So there is nothing different that I am producing here. But I just feel like when you visualize it, sometimes there are some misconceptions or biases that fall away. Like, for example, Jesus, people have slated him for years, right? Ever since he's been at Man City. And he does show up here. He is pretty low on this. But what also shows up is his npxG per 90, which is, again, very high. Now, the other thing is, of course, he doesn't get 90 minutes, so it doesn't matter. But and also, I think his color scale is pretty unremarkable now, because when he was at Man City for a couple of seasons, maybe it would have been higher than that. But now that he's firmly second choice at Arsenal, it's not looking good anyway.
Yeah. There was a point in chat mentioned it in terms of weighting towards recent seasons, but then also just the discussion point on Sancho to Haaland. I think we've actually internally had this discussion with ourselves previously, where I tend to think that when you look at the big aberrations in finishing skill, none of them are actually strikers. So it's quite impressive that Alvarez and Haaland are where they are, because they are actually strikers, and they tend to have or receive extremely high value XG per shot. So it's not like they have too many chances, I think, intuitively to sort of overperform that. Whereas I suppose what I'm trying to say is if you're really good at free kicks, those are really low XG opportunities. If you tend to overperform them more, I'd imagine that would sort of help correlate to your finishing skill. But Sancho, actually, I just had a look as well. I mean, even in the poor seasons that he's had, and this is what, once again, it's not like managers necessarily pick players based on finishing skill. This is just a discussion for FPL. And so Sancho, you can already exclude in terms of comparing to Haaland, because Haaland has insane XG, a couple more times over Sancho. So that already sort of separates them completely. And then Sancho, once again, when you factor in minutes, isn't even someone that you necessarily need to consider.
Exactly.
It's not really an indication of whether he's any good. Because once you sort of apply the expected minutes you have for Sancho, he's just a non-option. And what I'm saying is, when he had a bad season for United, but he still scored 6 goals within very limited minutes under Ten Hag, that already is still, once again, a positive illustration of his finishing skill. But everything else is unfortunately negative. So you just need to put that into context. And I do think Haaland looks still exceptional here. I mean, ridiculous, actually, how good he is at finishing, and how many chances he gets per game.
Chasm between Haaland and Nunez is exactly what you get when you are elite at finishing as well as at getting npxG. So that just illustrates that. And also, so Tahir says that he can't wrap his head around Haaland being less of a finisher compared to Sancho. I just feel like that is because people try to visualize a particular scenario, and then in that scenario they think, oh, Haaland is going to score in this, but Sancho might not score in this.
Yeah.
But your explanation was perfect, that if you look at the top finishers in Premier League, hardly any of them are strikers, which elevates Haaland to an elite level as it is, and B, it also shows that that is the reason why he's getting so many goals per season. It's because his npxG is elite and what you would expect from a striker of that quality, but he's also converting them. But if you don't convert them, you become a Darwin Núñez. So I think that's the only difference.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about some of the interesting players here that I suppose, like Minte, for example? Any thoughts on him? He's someone who has garnered a lot of discussion on Twitter, and I think it's probably the flavor of the month.
So I actually have a question for you. Gross to Dortmund finally happened. We spoke about it for weeks on the podcast and nothing was happening, and then all of a sudden it happened a couple of days ago. So let's say Enciso is also out, and we'll come to that. I'm sort of spoiling the next segment that we have, but Enciso is probably out for a long time as well. So given that players that are leaving Brighton, first of all, I know that they were never competing with Minte for minutes, but what sort of impact do you think in general that you need to account for in estimating minutes for Brighton?
So I think well, at least with March, he seems to be out still for a while, so that's pretty huge when it comes to right wing minutes.
Exactly.
As far as Adingra, I'm not actually sure what the situation really is with him, but he hasn't actually gotten as many preseason minutes as you'd think. So you can already see a little bit of the changing of the guard, in my opinion, in terms of minutes. And then there's the really tough factor, which is this is a new manager, so actually we can already almost eradicate some of our previous thoughts on players. But I think looking at what a lot of the Brighton fans seem to say, they're very comfortable with Minte's minutes at the start. And same with João Pedro too, as long as he's fit. But that's actually the bigger question, I suppose, with him. So with Minte, one of the issues that I think is a bit tough with Brighton is still the fixtures to start with. So him occupying a 5.5 spot, particularly when you probably want to be playing a 5.5 player quite often at the start of the game, that could sort of add into your consideration. And then it becomes a question of, do you actually prefer the 5.5 midfielder or the 5.5 forward as well? Because one of the issues that I've dealt with within my own drafts, right, is if you go for, let's say, a double Fulham or a double Brighton, the issue is you're not benefiting from the rotation possibilities. So the beauty of, let's say, going with a Brighton player and a Fulham player is you can rotate the fixtures, and you can get, let's say, Andreas in a good fixture, João Pedro in a good fixture. But if you double stack, let's say, Brighton, or you double stack the cheap Fulham players like Muniz plus Andreas, you're gonna get the extra bad fixtures and have a poor team fielded that week. And when it's really good, I suppose it's you're also benching one of those good players. So it doesn't feel like you're optimizing too much. So my issue with Minte is also, unfortunately, very much linked to João Pedro, because if you are considering João Pedro in your draft, then it almost removes the need for a Minte. But I think his minutes seem good to start. I need to say that we saw a lot more rotation under Arne Slot and Feyenoord, so I don't think we can really say that, for example, his average minutes there are a good indication of his minutes under Brighton. As I said, with March being out, and I'm not sure if Adingra is that important to start the season, his minutes still seem quite good. because once again, you go back to things like how much the club spent on him, how high people are, how good his preseason minutes already are to start. It just seems like if you want to go for him, he seems pretty exciting. But maybe the question back to you is, someone asked me on Twitter, how do you sort of treat someone's, let's say, Eredivisie numbers, and how do you translate them, in a model, or how to think about it?
There was I'm not going to say back of the envelope because there was more research that went into that, but there was a conversion chart that was posted a couple of years ago. If I have it bookmarked, I can repost it or share it with you, which gave an estimate of how much a player's attacking potential drops as a factor, not just in words, but actual values. So they quantified the drop off in numbers for attackers when they transfer from League A to League B, and they covered as a cross table. They had covered, I think, the top 10 or 12 leagues. So for some leagues there wasn't enough data because not enough players had moved from one league to the other. But for the Premier League, obviously there was enough data for every single league for players that moved from that league to the Premier League. And Eredivisie was pretty low on that, as in they had to be nerfed substantially. So I do think there is obviously going to be a drop off because Feyenoord was top one, top two team has been for the past couple of seasons, whereas Brighton is firmly mid table, or let's say top 10, but still lower end of top 10. So his numbers will definitely down or move downwards, but I just used the raw numbers for this one. But if I were to predict those numbers for, let's say, this season, I would scale them by 0.8 or 0.7, multiply them.
Okay.
Because I think that is going to be a definite drop off of some quantity, and then there's going to be an additional drop off of playing for a lesser team, a lesser relative team. Sorry, let me rephrase that. A relatively lesser team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a good example of that last season too, right? With Mo Kurush. He came from from Ajax, who were apart from the actual season that he left, very much dominant in the league. And I think he was averaging something like upwards of 0.5 xG per 90, but then he moved into a team that is much inferior to Brighton, at least when we look at last season's attacking standards in West Ham. So I think the drop off in terms of quality of teams was definitely probably a bit more significant given the gulf that's already present between West Ham and Brighton. But yeah, there must be some sort of nerf applied, and who knows? I can't imagine it'll be that bad because we have some pretty good expectations of Brighton, I would say. But something to probably keep track of as we look later into the season. But was there anyone else in this graphic here that probably stuck out to you, or that you thought immediately was against your expectations?
So you had mentioned Undav in our previous podcast.
Yeah.
If there's any way he gets good minutes, I am interested in him because he has always been pretty good when it comes to npxG. And he has shown that in multiple leagues, in multiple seasons. Again, there is a drop-off from Bundesliga to the Premier League. Now, I am hoping that Nkunku helps reverse the trend a little bit. But the past couple of players, except for Erling Haaland, obviously, who have come to the Premier League, have had a drop-off when it comes to their expected stats. So I hope he can get some regular minutes. And if he does, then I'm interested primarily because of his career XG. I think other players were more of, I would say, just fun to see those players crop up, like Trossard and Odegaard. So I did not think of either of them as good finishers, but they are both in the top 10 in the Premier League. Fair. So that's pretty significant.
I mean, one of the things here too is once you have that just incredible season like Odegaard had in 22-23, that's gonna it'll take a lot of effort in other seasons to even damage that, right?
Fair enough. And his style has also changed, where now he will never get back to that level of shot spamming as in compared to his career, not in general, but you're right. You're right. He will never experience a down season in a similar role that will counteract the positive finishing he managed to register. So I agree with you.
Yeah. And then Trossard, it's weird. I do tend to think of him as like, well, just an elite sub, right? And then I suppose he's just some sort of small sample size demon.
No, but you're right. That does contribute to it, right? Because if you are only going to play for 30 minutes and if you manage to get a goal, first of all, that helps your npxG.
Yeah.
But if your npxG itself is not a higher sample or a greater sample, then you've already pointed that out to me, which actually helped me change it up a little bit. Where so Fran pointed out to me essentially that when I'm looking at finishing skill, npxG is the sample. It's not minutes, which for some reason I'd completely overlooked. So if we remove players with low npxG or take a threshold of a certain npxG, maybe Trossard won't be even in this list.
Yeah, that could be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest, this isn't too contrary to our expectations, but it still just points out that a lot of the outliers are the ones we do tend to expect. And at the end of the day, even if you're, close to, let's say, average as a finisher, which we can say for Salah, it just is ridiculous that he's getting that level of chances, because you can see that he's in a category of his own as a midfielder. So once again, as long as you appear to be an outlier really anywhere within a lot of these charts, it's just a good thing.
Would you say that, so I want to get your opinion, and maybe if people from the chat have an opinion as well, is it more helpful to have this per position?
Yeah.
Do you think there's more value in that?
I think it's tough, because I feel when you look at the midfielders, once you sort by midfield, then Salah becomes even more of an outlier than you'd think. But then I also like contextualizing it in terms of mixing the attackers, because I guess my mind's already geared around that. So for me, like, I find it more impressive that Salah's like in a league of his own with forwards, and maybe you can even say of Minte right now. So I kind of like this, but I wonder if people in the chat would like to think about these things.
Even in the previous graph, Trent is, I think, the only defender who shows up.
That's true. Yeah, he did show up.
So you are right that in the context of all players, it just helps us see how ridiculously overpowered Trent is. But also, if I were to just plot defenders, Trent is going to be like a mile away from everyone else. So am I really getting more information out of it? Maybe I'm missing out on someone like Paro, who would show up if I were to just plot defenders, just to show his value, right? Because
that's true. Yeah,
he is someone who does have attacking value in both npxG and XA.
Yeah, I think we could probably even look into that for the defender specifically, because I think that's a good separation, defenders and attackers, because absolutely, we want to sort of contextualize maybe how good, let's say, a Munoz conceivably is, even though we actually still we lack data from him in terms of a league, right, that has tracked data. I think he does come from the Belgian league. Am I wrong? Or
where did he come from? Now that you say that,
he did come from Genk. So we did have data actually on him.
We do.
And he was actually very strong. So it'll be cool to see some of the defenders definitely up there.
Yeah.
But
let me do that then for
that sounds good, and we can definitely have a look into that. Okay, and then the thing that we wanted to look at as well, just briefly touching on the Olympics. Argentina, I think they just got knocked out, right, by France.
Yes, 1-0.
So Mateta, continues his journey in the Olympics, which means we'll probably not see him in game week 1. I mean, the guy probably needs a bit more of a holiday, or you can argue, I don't know, actually. I mean, do you think he could just jump straight back into his team if France get knocked out anytime soon? Or because I suppose he's been taking a holiday because he wasn't actually in the Euros. So the contractual holiday that you take before you
he's already out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. So I wonder if he's technically even still match fit and can just go straight back to the league. I think maybe we've overblown how many minutes Mateta would lose, because a lot of people tend to think that some of these players are coming from the Euros or coming from Copa America, then suddenly being involved in the Olympics, then suddenly having a holiday. But actually with Mateta, he's someone who probably had a holiday, then played, well, probably not a holiday to be honest. Maybe he's been training for the Olympics for a bit, but
I don't think so, because I remember that Thierry Henry is the coach, right?
Yeah, he is the coach. Yep, he is the coach.
So I saw the tweet where they announced that the training camp was starting, and I think it was barely a week and a half or 2 weeks before the Olympics.
Yeah.
So he definitely has had a break. And this was the exact question I asked myself when I saw this list. I think anyone, Enciso, because Enciso suffered a bad injury apparently yesterday when Paraguay was playing again in the Olympics. And then the second one is Alvarez. I know for a fact that Alvarez is not going to play anytime soon.
No.
He is absolutely must have been burnt out by now.
And he's very much set to leave the club because the transfer news has heated up. He's out of the tournament, and you've only seen increase in terms of links to PSG and Atleti. And yeah, he needs a break regardless. So for
Mateta, just to complete my thought, Mateta, I definitely feel is one of those that instead of playing for Palace to get warmed up for the Premier League, he's playing for France at the Olympics and getting the exact same thing out of it. Also, because he is not playing 90 minutes, he played, I think, 60, and then 70 or something like that in the first 3 games.
Right. But so yesterday he played the full extra time, I saw.
Yeah. Yesterday he played the full time. But just to contextualize him playing 90 minutes was that in the previous 3 games, he was well rested. So as another example, Olise was benched for the 3rd game in their group stage. So I don't think he's going to lose any minutes, Mateta. But for the other 2 players who we care about, or maybe for Enciso, we care about Enciso's minutes because it impacts, for example, João Pedro's minutes. I think that is a good thing for João Pedro. But yeah, I do feel bad for Enciso because he's had really rotten luck when it comes to injuries.
100%. Yeah, and to be honest, those are the only key players, right? So we can probably move on. But it's an interesting piece because when we look at some of the EV for a player like Mateta, it's not amazing, to be honest. It's quite subpar. And that's probably also due to his career underlyings being really poor. And I suppose there needs to be an element to buy in, and that applies to Munoz as well, right? Like how good are these players going to be now that they're under Glasner, clearly first choice, and maybe they're definitely a better team than they were under Roy. So if you don't care about any of the numbers under Roy, are fixated on Crystal Palace post Glasner, he's probably going to be really good. But then how far do we overstep in our judgment with that? It is the main question, and I don't know. It's a bit of a tough one with Mateta because once again the historic underlines are not amazing, but he's still on that hot run of form given that he scored yesterday as well. The last piece is just going to be looking at some of the transfer data. So this is just transfermarket.com, just to give credit to them, but a good page just to walk through transfers, maybe just touch on our general thoughts. Calafiori signing for Arsenal, probably just going to make them a bit of a stronger team in terms of depth in 2 certain positions. And Arteta even mentioned and intonated, Saliba playing every single minute of last season. That might not, and probably should not replicate itself. So finally some center back coverage, I suppose, that Arteta is happy with, and Timber clearly is also back. So I have no interest in Calafiori at the start of the season. I don't think he'll be nailed at the start, and I think Arteta's comments confirm that, but level of defense, I can't imagine it'll get that much better, to be honest. But it just gives you, once again, comfort that it could maintain itself. And if there's ever a point in the season where he becomes nailed, I still think he's well priced at 6 is my only thought.
Yeah, I the only thought I have is Calafiori just makes Gabriel just a non-option in FPL.
Yeah,
so
potentially.
He impacts more of other defenders' 6 minutes. I don't think anyone was looking at Timber anyway, but maybe we were interested because he is priced lower than the other defenders, but just these are just non-options. And I'm glad they priced him higher, Calafiori, because that just makes sure that even if there is an injury, we have to pay a premium price for an Arsenal defender.
Yeah, and as we should, for sure. Maybe so transfers out. So I guess this includes. We can just move on. I think we'll just do transfers in for each club. So Aston Villa would be next. In this case, two transfers out are quite significant. It's Douglas Luiz
Yes.
and Diaby. And I don't know. Any thoughts on, let's say, how you sort of evaluate them, potentially even as a defense, with some of the changes? Any thoughts on players like Maatsen as well, or is it not too interesting for you?
No, from an FPL perspective, again, I'm looking at X minutes, and for the players that have been transferred out, X minutes and penalty repercussions. So penalty share definitely is up in the air now. Again, I feel like Tielemans and McGinn are the primary two contenders.
Yeah, I know you said McGinn, but I can't see it. But yeah, happy to be wrong.
Again, he has only taken one penalty in his club career, so there is no evidence for me to state that he will definitely take penalties if Tielemans is not on the pitch. And as I said, strikers can definitely overturn the lack of confidence. So if Watkins is happy with where he is, he will take a penalty at some point. I don't doubt that, because he's too good of a player to be that bad at penalties. If he chooses to, and if he wants to, obviously he can take a penalty. So it is up in the air. So that's all that means. And the other part is minutes, right? So there's an additional slot for midfielder. I'm assuming it's going to primarily be taken over by Barkley to an extent. Do you think there's any other player, or Kamara is out for a long time, right? Or at least some time.
I think he might be back.
Oh, he is? Okay, sorry, my bad. So
No.
if he's back, then Kamara will be the player coming back, and his spot was not Douglas Luiz anyway. So I'm looking at the other midfielder spot.
Yeah.
So I have no interest in any of those, if I'm being honest. And Maatsen just adds more uncertainty to the left back spot. So again, X-Men's not a big fan.
Yeah, I think my main point is, I suppose their transfers haven't really.
Diaby and Bailey. So Diaby leaving has absolutely taken away any chance of Bailey being sub for Diaby. Now he could be sub for someone else, but at least there's one less player now. Sorry.
Yeah, I think Bailey has always been a problem for himself with his sort of ability to stay fit. So more a case of that. But it's nice that he was relatively injury free last season. So I'm sure hopefully he can build on that. They have a touch more depth this season, which they do need, but you can argue it's probably not good enough quality necessarily to compete in the Champions League at the same time. But I think they will try their best to manage. And some players are back, right? Like Buendia's back, Mings is close to coming back, and it seems like.
Would you look at someone like Leicester's season to compare what happens when a club gets into the Champions League? All of a sudden, or Newcastle. I think Newcastle United is a better example from last season, right?
Yeah.
That absolutely did impact their season.
I think so.
Now, they got a lot of injuries. Maybe that will not happen with Aston Villa, but at least the constant interruptions in the rhythm, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of UCL interrupting Villa's fixtures, but for the first 6 weeks, it's still okay, right? Because there are none.
Yeah.
There are no UCL games, is what I mean.
I guess my concern with someone like Maatsen is I'm not sure if he's going to be some sort of amazing pick. So there's no one really from Villa that I truly love outside of Konsa, and he's still quite a dull pick. And we'll look into Watkins, but I don't see us starting the season with him potentially. No. But I am quite cautiously optimistic that he'll be on pens again, just because they lack a true penalty taker that's actually any good outside of Tillmans, and I can see him maybe reclaiming it back. But that's it for Aston Villa. Bournemouth, nothing really. I think they sort of just consolidated some transfers. Unal seemingly is injured still. They did sign a big center back option, so that's nice, and a goalkeeper. But I can't see too much changing with Bournemouth. The only interesting player still to me is Solanke at any point in time. Maybe we'll get a defender if we ever find a little bit more value to, let's say, someone like Kirkes or whomever. But yeah, nothing too interesting for me.
Yeah, I think Lloyd Kelly going to Newcastle is more impactful for Newcastle.
Yeah.
In terms of FPL rather than Bournemouth.
Yeah, because I think they've replaced him well, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and Solanke leaving could be the one thing.
That's true.
Obviously, that impacts them. But for now, it's pretty normal.
Yeah, Brentford, unfortunately, Igor's out, and Tony's still at the club, so we can't really comment. So we just moved to Brighton. We talked about Minte a little bit.
Yeah.
Little bit more midfield strength within the team. Osman is also now someone who we definitely can see probably taking up some surplus minutes within the team. They now have a lot of depth, like an insane amount of depth, and I don't know. Beyond that, really, I'm not too necessarily infused with any other picks that are new. The loss of Pascal Gross is gigantic. There's a huge set piece gulf, but also just in general, just in open play, the control, that aspect of the midfield. I don't think we were particularly impressed with the Brighton midfield, sans Gross ever. So not super high on the state of that position within Brighton. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So you've pretty much covered it. Joao Pedro is the only player I'm looking at. Maybe Dunk, but like you said, gross leaving is substantial in all aspects of their game, and I would try to. I want to minimize my investment into Brighton assets. It's going to be Pedro or no one.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, like I'm sure anyone evaluating Brighton as a team would have expected that Gross had a huge contribution, or was expected to have a huge contribution once again this season. Despite being 33 years old. So they haven't necessarily replaced that, but they do have some really strong, nice attacking additions, and as I said, some pretty big weaknesses with Gross leaving. So we'll see how that goes. Chelsea. So Dewsbury Hall will most likely play a lot of football, which that's a pretty big impact. The goalkeeper situation we already think is tenuous. Guiu is nice center forward depth, but that's really it for them.
Gallagher is leaving, but again, that we don't particularly care about that. They have too many midfielders anyway.
Yeah. Palace. So they've signed Sarr and they've signed Kamara. And I guess the question will be how the minutes are balanced, I suppose, between players like that. Do you have any thoughts initially on Kamada and Sarr?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that means that Eze plays firmly, like it means that most of Eze's minutes will now firmly be as Cam, rather than splitting them between maybe on the wing and at Cam.
Well, I guess we still think Sarr's probably a bit of a right winger. So then I guess Eze could play on the left as well.
Okay. And if that's the case, then again, there is no tangible impact for me. I just think that they've done a better job of replacing Olise than many other clubs. For example, Gross, like we talked about. Gross, I don't think Brighton have done a good job so far. But at least Palace have moved early, and they've given enough time for the new players to acclimatize.
Yeah, because I think when I think about, let's say, a team like Palace, they've been playing Schlupp in the preseason. So I imagine you can say, okay, he's sort of replaced by someone like Eze for the time being, but still there's only sort of 3 positions within the team because they kind of play like a back 5, right? And then they've got like a midfield pivot. So then you're saying 4 key attackers now in terms of the new signings and Eze and Mateta. Then Kamada and Sarr probably have to somewhat share minutes, or somehow the style's a little bit different.
Gay leaving could be huge, by the way. If Gay leaves, then I'm definitely not starting with Munoz.
Okay, yeah, because you just think that's true, yeah. Because I mean, I can't imagine they're going to replace someone with quality of Gay for anything. Yeah. So that's a good point. They did sign a player from Betis, as you can see as well here, but yeah, it's made me a little bit cooler on Kamada potentially, because I don't think we can say that he's going to be playing 90 minutes of football on end, if that makes sense. So we already know that Eze's a bit more of an 80-minute player, which is fine. I mean, with all the tools that he has in his locker from an FPL perspective, doesn't really impact him, but I can't see Kamada and Sarr's minutes being amazing unless we see a change in tactical style.
Is that the Moroccan flag? So I think Chadi Riyad is playing right now for Morocco at the Olympics, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
He could be.
Yeah.
They just beat USA 4-0, didn't they? So
yeah. And Hakimi is stat padding his way to probably a medal.
I did see that goal. It's quite a good Well,
Yeah.
pretty tame finish, but somehow not saved. But yeah, I mean, I don't really love Kamada as a starting option because I know a lot of people have considered him. And I know that his best football was played under Glasner. So when you look at actually Kamada's underlying stats, they're really good when he was playing in Frankfurt, but also really bad in Lazio. And I think you'd immediately sway to saying he can produce something close to the level he did in the Bundesliga if he's properly utilized. The only thing, as I said, yeah, is just minutes. I'm not too fond. The Palace fixtures aren't actually that good. I think what makes Eze amazing is just that he's just ridiculously broken. He is exactly like Mbumo. You would play him basically regardless of whatever fixtures he had. It's not the case that we're actually generally high on Crystal Palace to start. And that even goes for the defense too, right? Like the reason why we're quite high on someone like Henderson is because a lot of the other 4.5s don't necessarily have amazing fixtures to start as well. Like Brentford actually have worse fixtures, like some really tough ones in there, despite having 2 home games. Chelsea we're just uncertain about. Otherwise, we'd probably pick over Crystal Palace. And then within the other 4.5s, there's not too many other interesting keepers outside of when we talk about 4.5 defenders, and Mykolenko exists as another interesting option. But yeah, so that's Crystal Palace. Everton.
Sorry, just before you move on, you mentioned Kamada's stint at Lazio, right? And if I remember this correctly, Serie A has actually flipped, where now the average number of goals in Serie A are the highest of the top 5 leagues.
Right. Yeah.
Compared to their generic reputation of being the stingiest league in the world. So I am concerned by him not being able to replicate his Frankfurt underlines at Lazio, but that could also be just a team strength.
I did look into like Kamada's a little bit unfortunate stint in Lazio, and unfortunately only played like 1,200 minutes and was playing a slightly different role within the team. So I think I'd give him the pass on that. But as far as once Eze comes back into that team, the minutes should be quite comfortably split between players, because you have to think as well, someone like Ayew can play good minutes, and you know it's probably more of a dampener for everyone else than anyone who's Eze or Mateta. So yeah, Everton, little bit more center back depth, which is nice. Nothing crazy. I think we could move on potentially. Fulham. So Smith Rowe. That's the only interesting thing. I suppose. You know, is there anything that would lead you towards starting the season maybe with Smith Rowe over, let's say, an Andreas, given that you already have a 5.5 position within your draft and it's a Fulham player?
Penalties. That's it, I think. And also I said that if, let's say, Smith Rowe is taking corners from one side, both sides, whatever, maybe indirect free kicks. Right. If he's on some sort of set plays, then maybe I will consider him, because I definitely feel his X-Mins are going to be higher than Pereira's.
Yeah. I don't know if Pereira is already back at the club, ready to play the next 2 friendlies, which I think they have. Because I think they have one versus Sevilla and then maybe one versus a Bundesliga team, if I recall. And that could give us a small indication of a couple of things that we would be interested in, like penalties, like set pieces, and obviously the range of set pieces too. Plus also maybe potentially like what is their starting formation? What is the midfield setup, you know, post Palhinha, what is the right wing position going to look like in terms of, you know, how the minutes are shared? Sessegnon transfer I don't think has any impacts on how I feel about them. I think
for people Robinson, who are considering Anthony Robinson,
I still think Robinson is absolutely still the player I would go for.
He is, yes.
Yeah, I can't see Sessegnon basically taking away minutes that he would have, and he was able to play the full extent of minutes really most of last season, Robinson that is. So I wouldn't let that sway you on like Robinson versus Castagna, but I mean some Fulham fans are also pretty low on Kenny Tete, and they think that he could maybe leave the club too. So if it matters too much, I guess you can always go Castagna, but I'd still probably back Robinson if you really want to go for a Fulham defender, which is
pretty bleak.
Yeah, it is a touch bleak. Yeah. It is a touch bleak. Ipswich, nothing too interesting. Leicester signing Fatah was nice, but you know he was already there last season. Reed is nice too for depth, but they're still lacking a lot of transfers, and I think the manager has already voiced that sort of concern, very much like Scott Parker did in seasons past. So yeah, we'll find out about that, but nothing too interesting. Liverpool, you want to talk about maybe just their preseason? They don't have any transfers, but I've noticed, someone like Fabio Carvalho is actually playing minutes now in
Yes.
the preseason. It seems like maybe he could be a part of the squad this season. But the more important thing that I find is Harvey Elliott is actually being a big fixture of the preseason. Lots of minutes as a 9 or a 10. He's definitely going to take away, in my opinion, from Sobo, potentially, or even a Curtis Jones. I think less so McAllister, but that's just sort of how I rate the players anyways. But it already has an indication that we've seen so far, which is Endo doesn't seem to be very well rated by the manager, so minutes will probably be filled out by something like, Sobo or McAllister dropping a little bit deep at times just to sort of progress the ball, and then they still end up in really healthy positions. But there's only going to be one 10, and that 10 is either, honestly, I still think it could be McAllister, but yeah, Sobo, McAllister, or Harvey Elliott, that sort of three. And it looks good for Harvey Elliott, but once again, going back to Feyenoord, going back to the minutes from last season, have a look at, let's say, the FBref page for a team like Feyenoord, and just look at the minutes the attackers shared. It's not very promising. I have to say, as much as Liverpool could still look as good as they did in the past, which was the best attacking team we had last season, you still have to say that outside of Salah, it's very hard to guess the minutes correctly for certain players. And despite, let's say, someone like Elliott or Sobo being decently priced, you still want them to be starting games consistently. And I'm not sure if any of them can really do that consistently enough for you to say that they're worth, a spot over, let's say, I don't know, maybe Nkunku at 6.5 or even Andreas at 5.5. It's an interesting one.
It's weird because they have so many forwards now who are fully fit and available at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Last season, it was sort of a staggered process, right? Where either Jota was injured, or there was like a Darwin small injury here or there, or he was just being rested because he was playing too much, maybe. And even their midfield was out of sorts in a way. So it's funny, you didn't even mention Gravenberg. Is he still there?
Yeah, yes.
Oh, okay. So I have not seen a single mention of him anywhere. Even when I'm watching Liverpool versus Arsenal, I forgot that he even existed. So maybe we don't even need to consider him. I'm just thinking McAllister could actually be their best option from midfield after Salah, of course, because the uncertainty with minutes is too much for me. And again, any injuries which would nail a particular player to that position are, of course, the caveats. But right now, there are too many players competing for far fewer slots. So it's going to be Salah to begin with, if or no one in midfield. But slots, minutes, or his play style when it comes to his fullbacks is actually more encouraging, I would say. Yeah. So I'm actually more encouraged by how Gertruda and Robertson, not Robertson, Hanko and
Hartman,
Trauner, even the centre back.
Yeah.
How they've played overall, and I just feel like maybe this is a chance to invest more into Liverpool's defense, even with maybe double defense rather than
that's fair.
Trying
to and obviously
Kwanzaa
is the interesting piece, I suppose. If we think that he could just maybe take the minutes away from Konate, which it seems like he can, right? Because the preseason's strong, and that's the one position I'd say, Slot is likely to rotate less in. So Man City, they got Savinho, incredible transfer. I think if anyone has the time to listen to Opta's La Pausa podcast, which is dedicated to La Liga, and then listen to their end of season awards, and then look at how that podcast session was basically a 20 to 25 minute glazing session of Savinho and his sort of dribbling numbers, and how they actually rivaled the likes of Messi and were better than Vinicius and even Nico Williams last season, then give that a listen. I don't think he's going to suddenly jump straight into the team and start, but I think he's not getting loaned out, and I think he'll be a big part of the season regardless. I think he was a tremendous player just watching him in La Liga, and I think people are going to find out that we have another very annoying dribbly kid, but unfortunately in the position that Man City lacked a lot of depth in. And it will be interesting. Beyond that, nothing exceptional for City. I think it's business as usual, but they already had an extremely strong squad. United, you want to talk about?
I think,
go on, sorry.
like we said, Alvarez might be leaving, which could be the most significant piece.
That's true. Yeah.
Of business, but nothing other than that. Yeah, United.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about actually what do you think the impacts will be to City? Like, are we seeing false nine Foden, something like that? Maybe rear its head
precisely
back.
What I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also maybe that just means that there are less instances where Pep can rest Holland, because
True.
The drop off is going to be significant now that Alvarez is not there to play as the striker.
Yeah,
I suspect he just changed systems and rest Holland, so it's not that he's bound or he's held hostage by a system, but I just feel like naturally it would mean that if Holland is fit, he just plays more minutes.
Yeah, by process of elimination as well, they're just going to need a lot of De Bruyne minutes too this season, and that maybe goes against his age a little bit, but yeah, it could also mean, I mean, I guess the knock-on impacts are things like a little bit more Bernardo minutes, and even for someone like Bob or Grealish who are struggling to get into the team. I'm not saying that they'll play as a 9 or anything like that, but just, you know, if you suddenly have to move De Bruyne or Foden into a false 9 position or something of the sort, then that probably means some of the utility players will be able to play a bit more as well. So just something to point out. Man United, so Euro unfortunately is out for a while. The Xerxes transfer is done. You're still anticipating some more midfield, maybe sort of reinforcements, but I guess, do you want to just touch on the market expectation of Man United, your expectation of Man United, and maybe I'll touch on what I've looked at in terms of review for all the players who are non-Bruno, maybe.
So I'm going to leave Ahmad to you. I'm just going to state that there is a good likelihood that he starts the first game and has, let's say, more than 50 X-Mins for the first couple of games. But I don't expect that to last for a long time if Rashford is back, because I just think it was a stamp, and it's not that big of a deal, but he could still be managed or subbed out early or something like that.
Yeah.
But Garnacho has definitely been rested a lot. He just went with Argentina and watched everyone win the Copa America and he's come back. So this, not a lot of football that he's played. He can definitely play 80 to 90 minutes. So if Rashford is not fit enough to start, we can definitely, or United can definitely start with Ahmad and Garnacho on the wings. For me, the two defensive reinforcements, if they were to come in, are of some interest, because De Ligt and Mazraoui, I think Mazraoui could be good, because I think Mazraoui has a lot of defensive limitations, but he is a good attacker. So if Mazraoui does come to United, I am interested in him when we have good enough fixtures from a defensive perspective. But for now, it's Bruno or no one. I mean, Ahmad is the one that you are going to talk about, but I'm just finding it very difficult to go for anyone else. I mean, if Shaw were to be fit, maybe look at Shaw, but he's been so unfit recently. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets injured in the first game, which I hope it doesn't happen, but I mean, it doesn't matter what I hope.
Yeah. I'm actually going to swerve and I'm going to be talking about Rashford first. I find... I just don't see Rashford as someone who's going to lose out that many minutes. I think he'll still be a main starter for the team. Unless we... Because I think even when you look at last season, there were definitely some performances where you can say most coaches in the world would be extremely frustrated with what he did. And not necessarily in terms of production, but just like effort, everything. Like it's... Yeah, I suppose for the one few times that you might want to see a manager's expression at a player, it wasn't great, but he was still able to very much secure that position down. Alongside Garnacho last season. I imagine his minutes will still be quite good to start. Having adjusted his minutes a little bit, to be honest, anticipating that the injury is non-severe, as you say, I do find that he actually is a little bit more interesting than even someone like Nkunku to start, and mostly because he has the positive impact of starting with a great game in Game Week 1. Obviously, as we tend to like players. You enjoy having the better fixtures as soon as possible because you have much more confidence in being able to sort of secure the EV or the value really in a player early on, knowing that their minutes will be good, knowing that you've comfort in the short term. But yeah, I find that he is quite optimal, and this actually goes against probably all our expectations, which would be that the United fixtures still look pretty average, because Liverpool is in there, but it is a home game, I believe. And it seems like for whatever reason, yeah, the EV is just generally across the board for United players quite healthy. Even if you're, looking at wildcard agnostic windows and things like that. So I quite liked the look of Rashford. I don't know, you might disagree with me, but even at 75 minutes, I thought Rashford actually had really good EV, which really shocked me. But probably doesn't, right? Because he's actually someone who we've seen him hit crazy numbers in the past. And
no, but the thing is, even when he has hit crazy numbers, the underlines were never crazy.
They were never crazy, yeah.
Which, and
but
I know that.
He is now priced at 7, I suppose, which is the big.
I agree.
Yeah.
Which means that for a 7 million midfielder, maybe they are good enough.
Yeah.
And they are that makes him a value player.
100%.
I just think there are too many spots for competition where Rashford starts most of the games, but as soon as there is some dip in form in double quotes, it's likely that he gets subbed early. And I think last season has been or is a precursor to this season where Rashford was subbed regularly around 60, 65, even before that.
Yeah.
So that just puts me off Rashford. But I do agree with the premise that he will start most of the games.
I think the one thing that I've noticed about Rashford is he's always been someone who's extremely XG dominant. So for a midfielder, that's a lot more valuable than a lot of the traditional mids that we tend to see, which are more XA dominant, have less XG, have good XGI as a whole, but then you kind of misvalue how good Rashford is amongst the midfielders at times, right? So for example, like if we go back to your graphic and then you suddenly like multiplied the XG by, I don't know, 5 for the midfielders and then 4 for the forwards, then someone like Rashford, I suppose, would stick out a little bit more sorely against the other midfielders in general.
If I were to, so you gave me a good idea, by the way. I'll give you credit when I post it. It seems good to post like weighted npxG numbers.
Yeah.
But I multiply assist by 3 across the board and then 4, 5, 6, and 10. I mean, I'm excluding goalkeepers, so the 10 is not necessary, but 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah. No, I think it could be interesting, right? Like looking at something like that, because that when I as someone who likes to sort of look at the data, like I tend to think Rashford is like almost like a budget Son at times, right? Where I'm not saying he's got finishing anywhere near the level of Son, but yeah, he's XG dominant. He's although very much depend on Son's position. Son's XA actually when he's a left winger is quite crazy, but yeah, so Rashford's always got really good XG as I've noticed, and that's probably a nice thing. And I think, you're probably right. There's so much depth there. He's probably going to be an early sub. We need to see a lot more before maybe being fully comfortable on him. And when you look at someone like Nkunku to compare at 6.5, you'd think his minutes can be good or shoot up to extremely good. Whereas I guess with Rashford, we're still at that sort of wait and see stage. So, but it's always nice to have a good Gameweek 1 fixture and then think you can maybe even transfer out of a certain player. So I'm not too against Rashford, but I think given that I have Bruno in my draft, I'm less keen on double stacking United. Yeah. But if I wasn't actually on Bruno, I think I'd definitely give Rashford a serious consideration as well. And that also applies to Garnacho too, to be fair. They're just really well priced for, I'm sure later in the season when we have a good United run, we could very well be very deep into a United offense because they're just underpriced in that sense. And hopefully you guys actually perform around then.
I think Garnacho for sure. We'll see with Rashford,
yeah. Newcastle. So Lewis Hall's the big one. I mean, he's not a new signing. This was sort of just the sort of finalization of the sort of loan deal. That basically just meant that the money would just be delayed a season, right? So Lewis Hall is now playing at times at back 5, which we've already heard about with Newcastle. But then also has played left back in some of the preseason games within a back 4. So a lot of people are much more confident that he could start the season as a left back. And I think that's gigantic because we saw Burn bench today. Maybe that, points towards that Lewis Hall could be someone who actually could get the Newcastle minutes that we want. and could fulfill the sort of function that we want from him in a non-UCL season for Newcastle. So I think that's huge. Any other thoughts maybe on their defense before we step into offense?
Just to quote Mo, they have 3 Cobham graduates now playing in their defense. But other than that, no. There's too many spots for too many players and far fewer spots. So maybe that rules out most of their defenders. And if Trippier leaves, as you say, I would still not go for Livramento because the numbers are wholly uninspiring.
Yeah.
So that just leaves me with I don't even know. I mean, Vlachodimos going there was a surprise to me because like 1 week I just exported the data from the API and I saw that Vlachodimos had gone to Newcastle.
I didn't even know that happened. Yeah, this is news to me as well.
Yeah, so that was the only surprise thing that happened. Where I was thinking, wait, why is it a surprise that he's in the API? And I found out that he actually is at a different club now.
Yeah, with Livramento though, I mean, what do you think about the sort of discussion about maybe them being in back 5 though, like Newcastle? It's too hard to probably
build. If it's a back 5, then again, if Gehi goes there, I'm more likely to invest in Gehi.
Good point, actually, yeah, because you could just do that instead. True. But then I'd also think Livramento's position would be a little bit more locked, right? If they were playing a back 5.
That is true. Yeah. That is true. Yeah. It's certainly more nailed than Lewis Hall. Because again, Livramento can play a right back and left back, left wing back, right wing back, all of those positions. So definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and I think it is nice that it's a non-UCL season because you tend to just see that a manager would probably like stick towards the same squad as opposed to sort of rotating too much. And I can't imagine it'll be too hard of us to sort of guess who's really first choice, second choice exactly. Because I don't think Howe is really that inconsistent with how he lines up a team. He's obviously inconsistent with his responses to media, but that's a separate piece. So I suppose some people might be thinking about Jacob Murphy at the start of the season because he could sort of lock down right wing minutes. But my concern still is, once again, he's just going to be subbed off early, and I don't know, like unless you're guaranteeing some sort of monumental haul versus Southampton. You know, his sort of use case, I suppose, in a draft is very limited to that. And it goes back to the Ahmad piece where he might be interesting if, once again, you're just targeting for game week 1. You don't need a player beyond that. And that's it. That player is done. But really, I still think if you're ever going to expend more money on a player who's not 4.5, you want them to be consistently playing decent minutes and for them to at least be a really good auto sub. And I think my concern is we already know that Gordon can play right wing minutes. I can't imagine that when you have 2 great players in Barnes and Gordon that you're going to give Murphy all the minutes and have Gordon and Barnes share the minutes. So, I just think that there's going to be definite rotation there, and we already know Almiron is still there, right? So, tough. Yeah,
players like Murphy, Ahmad are only for game week 1 bench boost, and then you wildcard in game week 2.
That's a good point, actually. That's probably their best use case. Forest, some really good signings, I think, across the board, just to strengthen their team. Like Milenkovic is nice. Miguel, although I don't think he'll start, is nice. And then they also got sort of almost like another forward included in the team. So I think what that has made me turn off of a little bit is going for any of the forwards, because I think there could be rotation. I think people still have very vastly different opinions on Wood and his importance in the team, but I still think that a lot of people think Wood will start most of the early season fixtures. So would I be that concerned about Awani like taking his minutes at the start of the season? I would say no, but maybe, you know, when it comes to the middle or the latter half of the season, you know, that's a separate discussion point. I just think his minutes feel still quite healthy at the start. But we probably have a decent confidence in them given their opening fixtures. So any thoughts about Nottingham Forest players, or are they not really featuring?
Not really. Just one thought, which was I did not know Elliot Anderson's transfer fee, and that has actually shocked me. It is
right, but the thing is, I think all you need to look at is the Vlachodimos deal, right? So these are just PSR deals, basically, where you're giving the other club pure profit, and it's very cheeky, but I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, basically, I think unfortunately, what you have to do now with all these Premier League clubs doing these deals is look at who's gone and who's come back. Compared to their base fees, and then calculate the pure profit, and that's the genuine transfer fee that you should really be concerned about. But
That is a great point, by the way.
it's so funny seeing these deals, because have a look at Vlachodimos's deal.
Yeah,
Because they had to make a profit on him despite, yeah. So it's just too funny. But
yeah. I'm sorry, I completely missed out on that. That
no,
is
it's all
crazy.
good. Yeah,
You play Football Manager. That's why you had an eye on that. Yeah,
I do play Football Manager. So Southampton, I don't know. All I'm saying is, I think actually the most important point to talk about is maybe Ben Brereton Diaz and how people think that will impact Armstrong. I spoke to Rob T on the day of the transfer, and I asked him, has there been an impact on Armstrong's goal projections for the season? And he said literally none. So unless the market already knew,
Stewart is likely to suffer more than...
Yeah, Stewart's more likely to suffer, but I think people are also erroneously making the discussion point that, you know, somehow Ben Brereton Diaz is going to impact Armstrong's output, because Armstrong has been playing as a winger at times and sometimes as a forward. I just don't think that's going to happen, really. So if you're someone who's higher Armstrong, which I know some people aren't, right? Because, you know, his Premier League sort of tally isn't anything to sort of be fond of, but I don't think you need to be really too concerned about either piece. I don't really like Ben Brereton Diaz's price, to be fair, but he was actually quite good last season in his small stint with Sheffield United. So
wait, so you don't like, as in you wanted him to be cheaper or more expensive?
I think he's well. I don't think he's well priced, actually. I think he should be. Nah, maybe I'm wrong. Actually, maybe I'm wrong.
I thought personally, I thought he was 0.5 underpriced. If he's going to get the minutes.
Yeah, I think my concern though is, I don't know if we really want to have a 6 million Southampton midfielder.
No, but 5.5 is definitely something to consider, which he's just competing with Andreas, right? Or Morgan, if that's the price point we're considering, 5.5 to 5 million.
Yeah, but then he's like,
did Adam Armstrong and Brereton Diaz both play for Blackburn at the same time? Yes, they did,
and Armstrong took penalties.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing is that the penalties, and the second thing is maybe the markets considered that they actually have a great sample, or not a large enough sample size, but at least some sample size of both of them playing for the same club, and apparently that must not have impacted Armstrong's output.
That's fair.
So,
yeah. I guess
I would go with that.
Yeah, it's tough, because I just think when you have a team that's that weak per se, it always feels hard to believe that a player can even deliver too much when they're not even the main goal threat, if that makes sense. But to be fair, his I think his underlyings in Sheffield United were amazing, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's why I owned him. Double game.
I think it was like 0.5, if I remember.
Yes.
Like XG per 90. So
he played for a few games.
Yeah, very few games. But at least 1,000 minutes of football, right?
Yes.
So yeah, fine. Maybe I'm wrong, actually, to be honest. I'll happily own up to being wrong if I am. But I felt 5.5 was, yeah, maybe it actually seems right. I was trying to think about whether he should be 5, but then I also think technically Rodgers is just underpriced, so that's not fair as a comparison.
Yeah.
Can I actually ask you a question on Rodgers, right? So Rodgers doesn't have tremendous underlying stats, but he's obviously a young player who we would expect would be improving. I suppose the eye test fans will say he's someone who's talented, and you'd see him as a growing player. So when you look at, let's say, Rodgers and the really subpar, let's say, stats that he had last season, but obviously better championship stats, which a lot of players have, right? For example, when Cameron Archer was a championship player before he came back to Aston Villa, or even, for example, his like loan stint last season, we thought he'd be decent. Rodgers has played in the Premier League at least, but do you have any thoughts in terms of like how fast players can sort of improve, or should we just temper our expectations, because we've already just seen Rodgers for like 1,000 minutes last season and it wasn't exceptional, I suppose?
From an expected value perspective, I think that review must have some sophisticated mechanism where there have to be a tremendous number of examples, right? Where we've had players who came up from the academy or went to a championship club, then came to the Premier League club, and now are being developed into a role. So if we look at Cole Palmer could be one of those examples. Now I don't remember obviously because it's been such a long time that when Palmer was at Middlesbrough and then when he came back to Man City, I don't know how much review had adjusted for that, but there are definitely a lot of examples for someone to model these young players where I completely agree with you that a lack of underlying stats should not put you off. But I also don't know what is inviting me to buy that player. There has to be something. If it's a change in role, for example, Gundogan, right? The classic case where Gundogan played further forward and got a lot of goals for Man City. That stint was also, there was no evidence for that. We just went with it, or people who went with it for him in that stint. There was nothing to back him up, or no stats to back him up, underlying stats. But you could just see a change in role, and you had to look at let's say the underlying stats of that position per 90 rather than Gundogan per 90, because Gundogan was not playing in his natural role. So I just feel like maybe we have to look at a combination of Morgan Rogers' underlyings and what are the underlyings of that role at Aston Villa.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
Because that role at Aston Villa certainly has a lot more sample size. And Unai Emery, throughout his career, has been pretty consistent with the way he plays. So I feel like we can gauge what sort of output he will get. But that is one of the best questions people have when it comes to players who are up and coming, because there is no underlying data to support them. So we have to bet on them somewhere, right? So maybe we can use the position underlines to determine that.
That's fair. And to be fair, Aston Villa, I don't think, I think they had a great finish last season, but we also don't expect them to be some sort of, Goliath attack. So maybe we should just temper our expectations just a touch on them as a team. Because when you look at someone like Watkins, his value is being a 90-minute player as opposed to like his underlying stats are stratospheric or anything like that. So that very much is the same case with players like Bailey, who he's actually a lot of quite XA dominant because he also takes up pieces and things like that. And and to be fair, we have a lot more history with Bailey and data. So Tottenham Hotspur, the transfers were all young players who can definitely play a part this season. I can even imagine some of these players maybe being loaned out because they actually have quite a bit of midfield depth. So it's a case of whether Ange will really be utilizing a lot of these young players and playing them, or like he has been in the preseason, or whether some of the more experienced players coming back like Bissouma and Bentancur will take away from a lot of the minutes. Because now you have a situation where right now, okay, they don't have a center forward, fine, Kulusevski plays there. That allows Madison to play as well, but then there's really two midfielders in a pivot. And then it's Sarr, who's probably first in the pecking order. Then you have Bentancur, Bissouma, Archie Gray, Bergvall, right? Because Højbjerg has left the club. So I know Bergvall's been incredible in the preseason, and so is Gray, but I can't see them getting that many minutes unless Ange changes quite a bit of what we've seen from him, which is, I think, still a bit of a preference to play the more seasoned, experienced players where he can. But outside of that, they still seem to be missing a lot of the transfer signings that we expect from them, which bolsters players like Johnson and players like Kulusevski. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on Tottenham as a team in general.
Looking at Brennan Johnson, honestly, and if they don't sign any stern competition to him in the forward spots, I could honestly see myself going for him. Yeah. That is the only player right now I'm looking at, and Pedro Porro.
Is that over Nkunku or just in conjunction?
In combination. I would still prefer Nkunku over him, but if I were to structure my team so that I have 6.5 million spots, and the way I did this, if I remember correctly, was to go for Van Dijk over Trent.
Wow, okay.
Fair. So that is how I can get to that, which when I say it out loud sounds ludicrous, that I would much rather have someone like Andreas over Brennan Johnson than have Virgil over Trent. But I'm just saying, like, if you want to structure your team like that, you could
I guess you could go
potentially.
Porro instead as well. If you're not gonna
And Porro,
go, yeah.
yes, yes.
If you're not gonna
Yeah,
go Trent, I suppose.
yeah. Porro actually would be higher up because of his expected value, and I just feel like, again, we've already touched upon this, but last season I made a mistake that I was overvaluing just the fixtures on the face of their difficulty for Mbumo, and
yeah,
rightly I was punished for it.
same
And
with
I don't
me.
want to make that same mistake again. So if the expected value is saying that it is significantly higher for someone like Poro, I am going to take it at face value because I don't have a better metric to judge.
It's true.
I simply don't. And my metric of judging was clearly faulty, as it immediately proved out to be. It didn't even take a single game week for it to prove to be wrong. So the second example, and which you did not fall prey to, was I went Adingra over Palmer. Again, looking at, Brighton have such good fixtures, and I don't know what I was thinking, honestly. That's pretty suboptimal. But just to illustrate that, I think Poro is probably going to be the first pick out of all Spurs players.
Yeah.
And if I were to go for a second player, I would try to see if I can fit Brendan Johnson into my team.
Question on Son. So I mean, I've looked into Son, and it seems like basically when he moves between left wing and center forward, it's not actually that bad because yes, of course, he drops off in like 0.2 xG per 90, which is very significant. But he also gains like 0.23, 0.24, like maybe XA back, which is very nice. And then it goes back to, is he still the sort of main man anyways, production wise within the team? So therefore, probably also still going to get a lot of the bonus share. Do you have any thoughts on let's say starting the season with Son over Saka, or it's not even really a debate for you?
If you don't go for, and you already spoke about this in the spaces yesterday, so I don't want to repeat all of that. I would just recommend people to go listen to the spaces you had yesterday with FPL Dan and Critic, where the Nomium draft was being mentioned. And I think the Nomium draft is the only structure where I see Son being a viable pick. I don't think he is a viable pick anywhere else.
Yep. Okay. And do you? I'm just curious right now. So do you like on your Haaland drafts? Do you like the double transfer to Salah at around Gameweek 3-4, or do you prefer the Son single transfer from Saka right now, just intuitively?
No, I am firmly looking at Saka to Salah. Gameweek 4, I think.
Okay, interesting. Right.
Yeah.
And that would mean you lose Haaland, right?
I believe that was part of the plan because
that makes sense.
Wait, was that? Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
you probably go Watkins, something like that. I think
it was Watkins. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, fair. Because I've been a little bit more drawn towards Saka to Son, but then I can kind of see the appeal of basically going Watkins.
But to be honest, the other factor is if both of us are starting without Salah, and let's say Salah gets most of his, he front loads his actual points in Game Week 1, then by Game Week 4, if his price is also going to go up by, let's say, 0.3, 0.4, I would rather than just keep betting against him.
Yeah, me too.
And then that would mean that I definitely go for Son.
That's fair.
Yeah. But as I say it, I'm already filled with dread because it's going to be a really long season if that happens.
Nah, it'll be fine. West Ham. So Somerville, is that actually confirmed? 100%? I think it's close to, but it's not official.
If Ornstein says it is, then
it's just not officially on this page. But look, they have extremely good attacking depth now, and Fulkrug seems to be basically there as well.
Best transfer window, I think. West Ham.
You think so? Yeah, just across the board. But then I guess the question is just going to be the midfield and the defense. Like, what do you think about? Well, they got Kilman as well, so it's a really good transfer.
They got Kilman. They got Guido Rodriguez as well, which
even Luis Guilherme I can say is a Football Manager talent. So
okay. I can only speak to Guido because I've watched him play a little bit and also Real Betis, right? He came from Real Betis.
Who are you talking about right now? Sorry.
Rodriguez.
Have they signed him?
Oh, they haven't. Okay, I thought he was signed already. My bad. So they are close to signing him because I also saw that.
Okay, yeah.
So if Guido Rodriguez is also coming in, then that's just insane depth for them because they already have Edson Alvarez, and I read somewhere, and this might be complete waffle, but there were apparently plans on fielding Edson Alvarez as a center back because he did play that role in a back three sometimes last
we've seen
season.
it, especially going back to Ajax as well. Yeah, so
Exactly.
yeah.
So if that is the plan, then overall, I just feel like they will be a much better team. Also, my opinion, Lopetegui is maybe different than what I heard in the spaces.
I
Where Dan
actually
is
have to
not.
agree with you. I'm pretty pro Lopetegui as well, but
I am pro Lopetegui.
yeah,
Especially
because
because I'm comparing him to Moyes, and there is definitely going to be an upturn in their underlines, both attack and defense.
yeah, and plus also I feel like it's really hard to judge him because of his stint in Wolves, whereas for the most part in Sevilla, and also you have to look at the trajectory of Sevilla as a club since he left. I mean, it's been horrible. They've basically been permanently fighting against relegation. Relegation, as I say, when they were a serial Europa League club under Lopetegui. So, yeah, I think we're slightly pro Lopetegui. Maybe also because we have a Spanish national team bias. But yeah, it's a great transfer window, I have to say, for West Ham. The only thing is their fixtures start off poorly. So then I think the pro to that is that we can just watch them play and then just pick their players later. I have to say Bowen is actually really well priced this season, especially since we think that the manager will be better. And his underlying stats were always good for a player playing in a really bad team.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So one to look, I think Bowen will definitely profit from this, and Fulkrug could actually be interesting, depending on his price.
Right, and
because
he
will
could take
penalty,
pens over James Ward-Prowse, maybe. Yeah, he could. And we have to find out what happens with Mr. Potential betting scandal. Maybe not, but
yeah, that is still
we'll
up in the air, right?
Because I think he might be joined up with the team, and then it might be a situation where they just play him basically until he gets suspended. I guess, I don't know. Wolves last team. I have nothing to say about Wolves, unfortunately. But I think what we can say is that everyone's quite low on Wolves, unfortunately. And that's a sad.
This actually,
indictment.
Kilman leaving and them not replacing him just makes me want to back Saka even more in game week 1.
Fair, yeah. Are you going to captain Saka? Is the question, I guess.
Right now he is my captain, but I saw you had captained Isaac in your screenshot, so
yeah, which I don't think is too bad.
It's a tough call.
Right,
it's a tough call.
Yeah. I think it's nice to go Saka basically because it's a huge ownership play as well, right? You know you're going to get the differential captain there. On ownership for sure, whereas I think people are actually mostly drawn to any Isaac captaincy now, right? Because even on a Salah draft, you might just go for Salah, I suppose, but it will be quite a split captaincy week, I guess. Just thinking about it now.
Funnily enough, Haaland's ownership might dictate the captaincy split, right? Because the more people buy Haaland, the less they own Salah, which means they have to go to either Isaac or Saka.
That's true.
So we might actually see both Saka and Isaac below 100%, even though Isaac could potentially be just a smidge above 100%.
Yeah, cool. Do you want to talk about anything else
interesting in the chat before we call it quits?
I think there were definitely a couple of points. Haaland starts in the friendly tonight. I actually have to be right back, so maybe you can go through some chat questions in the moment, and I'll probably return very quickly.
Yeah, no problem. So Jonas says, good evening, lads. Good evening, Jonas. Adam says, would you consider Armstrong to be the unanimous 5.5 striker option, even with Joao Pedro as a pick? So it all depends on Joao Pedro taking penalties and what do you think his X-Mins are going to be like? Because even though both Fran and I have Adam Armstrong right now, I feel like I could easily switch to Joao Pedro. But the only thing that is holding me back is sort of the experience people had last season with Joao Pedro. But to be fair, the manager is now different. So maybe it's not going to be the same case. K7 says, views on Trent since he's not even joined with the Liverpool squad yet. Last friendly is in a week time and he hasn't met the team yet as well. Look, I'm going to trust Arne Slot. I'm sure someone is going to ask him about this. Depending on how he answers, we'll see. But definitely, if he does not play even a single friendly, maybe you dial down his minutes slightly for game week 1, but with the assumption that he still starts, which is good enough for me for game week 1. opinion of Arsenal premium defender over Porro. If you look at, if you subscribe to FPL review, the expected value clearly states Porro is better. If you think Arsenal are likely to have more clean sheets and Porro's attacking stats are not sustainable, definitely you can look at that. But I just feel like Arsenal's XGC or expected XGC, how can I say, projected XGC is very high compared to the usual. I have Robertson. Saleh says I have Robertson to cover Liverpool defense. Yet should I change to Virgil? Look, I think Robertson has aged, and it's clearly showing with his minutes. So I would definitely go for Virgil. My first two choices are Trent followed by Virgil. But if you feel like Robertson is going to start every game, let's say for the first 6 weeks, because there are no Champions League fixtures, why not? He will definitely have more of an attacking threat compared to Van Dijk. Saleh says, I've gone for a Holland and Son draft. Which two of Cho, Nkunku, Muniz should you start in Gameweek 1? I would go for Cho and Muniz if they start, Cho especially. Nkunku, if Cho you think is going to start, then definitely those two, yeah. Jonas says, I'm Jota curious Gameweek 1. Yeah, Jota did say in a press conference that he is going to be the striker for the foreseeable. Yeah, well, welcome back, Fran. So I was just talking about our chat where Jota said he's the striker for the foreseeable future. So I was just telling Jonas that I would definitely not consider Jota. Maybe you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the issue is we tend to look at our drafts thinking that when you go for a player, you don't want to have to replace him in a few weeks' time. And I guess Jota does appear as one of those sorts of players within our drafts. So maybe when I tend to answer these questions, I tend to think if you suddenly build a draft where Jota is transferable, you have to make sure that everyone else isn't, in a sense. And if you've done that, then I guess I'd be a little bit more pro going for Jota. But then it's also the question is Jota that amazing that he would force you to sort of draft in that sort of structure, or otherwise? Because I still think, yeah, Nunez is still very impactful in terms of minutes, and the main thing is even if you see Jota starting, you're still going to see his minutes be impacted negatively, right? Just being an early substitution. I think that's just going to happen this season. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We already addressed the XA chat. Was Pedro Porro. So I'll add a couple of players that people have asked for here. For example, Holland on the XA chat, on the XA graph, and Pedro Porro as well. And I'll publish that tomorrow.
Very good point. By the way, there's 61 of you guys in the chat. I really appreciate you guys being here. If you have not subscribed to the channel previously, please consider it. Please drop a like on the video. It really helps support the channel. But 60 is insane. I think this could be close to our peak ever. So thank you guys for being here. And really
appreciate it. I think that's all. We've covered all the chat questions for this week. And so I'm just going to tell people next week, most probably we are going to have Elevenify with us on the stream. Most probably because he is a bit of a prima donna.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
He is.
But he is. So we'll see if we can get him on Friday. And then obviously the next stream will be our Gameweek 1 deadline stream. So it won't be a deadline stream, but closer to the deadline. So we'll see when we can set that up. Both Fran and I are going to be traveling, so we'll have to see how we can manage that. But I'm sure we can come up with something. So thank you everyone for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of your day. See you.
100%. Take care.